Welcome to The Math Show with Mr. DeClerico. Let's take a trip down memory lane to a time when you were in a silly fight with one of your friends. Your friend would say something like, "You're wrong." And you would say, "No, you're wrong." And your friend would say, "You're double wrong." And then you would pull the trump card and say, "You're wrong, infinity." And then your German friend, little Georg Cantor, comes along and says, "What cardinality?" This is a microcosm of the life of Georg Cantor. He was a man who tried to understand infinity, who had a knack of being misunderstood himself. As a young man, Cantor showed great promise in two things: the violin and mathematics. The latter became the chief focus of Cantor's life. Georg was a phenomenal student, and his father was excited to provide the means for Georg to study the ever-lucrative subject of engineering. But Cantor didn't want to be an engineer. He claimed he felt God call him to study pure mathematics rather than chase the money. To his delight, his father, a practicing Lutheran, consented, and off he went to study math. Cantor proved to be among the most brilliant mathematical minds in Europe at the time. He earned his doctorate and then was sought after by the most prestigious universities. Actually, no. Turns out Cantor was a controversial figure among the elite of the mathematical world, so he had trouble getting hired at any of the big-name universities in Germany. Why? Well, it wasn't for lack of motivation. Remember, the guy literally felt divinely appointed to study math. So what went wrong? It was his topic of choice that made him a tough hire. You see, Cantor had this obsession with the concept of infinity, an obsession that other mathematicians of his day found frankly embarrassing. But Cantor tuned out the haters and developed his work on infinity at a small university that agreed to hire him. Strange as his work was for his contemporaries, and for us honestly, Cantor ended up changing the way mathematicians understood the concept of infinity forever. Before we dive into Cantor's work, let's talk about infinity. For starters, infinity is not a number. You can't count to infinity, but you can approach it. Well, how does that work? Well, let's consider this function that I've graphed. Suppose we have a little ant that's climbing the function. As the ant approaches the x value of 0, it keeps going up and up and up. Or rather, its y value approaches infinity. It won't get there, but as long as the ant gets closer to an x value of 0, its y value will increase without boundary. We might say that to approach infinity is to increase without boundary. And for most mathematicians of the day, that's about as far as they'd care to know about infinity. Not for Georg Cantor, however, who is credited with the discovery of a way of explaining infinity differently than ever before. Cantor's biggest contribution to the mathematical world was the development of an entirely new branch called set theory. Well, what's that? Well, a set is like a basket that you could put numbers in. These numbers are called elements. Say I put 1, 5, and 8 in the basket. This set would have 3 elements. Now imagine that I put every integer in the basket. That is, I put every whole number along with its opposite, like 0, 1, -1, 2, -2, and so on, which I could conveniently represent with this z thing? Wait, what? Oh, gotcha. Now how many elements would be in the set basket? If you tried to count them, you wouldn't be able to stop. Your tally would increase boundlessly. The set of integers is infinitely large, so to speak. About now is when it starts getting weird. Cantor discovered something interesting about the set of real numbers, that is, the set of all numbers that are either rational or irrational, both the nice, neat numbers we've already talked about, and the wild decimally fellas like pi and e and the square root of 2. We conveniently represent that set with this r thing. He found that the set of the reals is also infinitely large, but in a fundamentally different way. To illustrate, let's consider an imaginary conversation between Georg Cantor and Chuck Norris. Now, legend has it that Chuck Norris counted to infinity twice. He says as much to Cantor. Cantor challenges him to do this with the real numbers, and, of course, Norris accepts. Norris presents Cantor with a comprehensive list of all the real numbers, or so he thinks. Cantor says without batting an eye, "It's incomplete." "Impossible," says Norris. Cantor remains confident. "I can name a number that you missed," he says. He starts at the 10th place of the first number on Norris's list, though in theory he could start at any place value, and he changes it. then proceeds to the hundredths place of the second number and changes it, then changes the thousandths place of the third number, and so on. Norris feels an unfamiliar sensation, a cold sweat. For Cantor has demonstrated that a number exists that could be neither the first, nor the second, nor the third, nor any other number on Norris's list. And now the death blow from Cantor. "Mr. Norris," he quips, "can you count the real numbers at all?" "Of course," says Norris, experiencing a foreign emotion that us common folk call self-doubt. "Well then," says Cantor, "I shall start at 0. Your turn. What's the next highest real number?" Norris realizes that regardless of the number he says, Cantor can retort with a number closer to 0. Cantor then narrowly escapes a roundhouse kick to the face and chalks another one up. Cantor 2, Norris 0. What Cantor demonstrated is that the real numbers are uncountable. Though there is an infinite number of integers, in theory you could still count them if you had all eternity to do so. Not so with the reals. You literally can't count them, even if you had all eternity to do so. Not even Chuck Norris can do it. Now here's an interesting question. What about the rational numbers? Are they countable? That I'll leave to you, your brain, and maybe a search engine, because this one's tough. So is an uncountable set bigger than a countable one? Well, is a better word denser? Neither of these ideas quite do the comparison of infinite sets justice. So Cantor actually came up with a new term capable of comparing the size of both finite and infinite sets: cardinality. Recall that first set, the set with 1, 5, and 8. That set has a cardinality of 3. Now consider the set of integers. That set has a cardinality of... what? Well, that letter that you see is called Aleph. It's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it has a subscript of 0. We use Greek and Roman letters plenty in math. Why not throw some Hebrew in there as well? So Aleph 0 is the designation for the size of an infinite set that's still countable. How about the set of real numbers? That set has a higher cardinality, namely Aleph 1. That's the designation for an uncountable set, or should I say a designation. Well, that implies there's an Aleph 2. What's that? Well, I'm not qualified to speak intelligently on that, or any other subscript of Aleph. As you can imagine, the rabbit hole goes pretty deep with infinity. So deep that you're liable to become a Mad Hatter, some thought. Segue to the end of Cantor's life, when his family admitted him to an institution against his own wishes. All was not well in the mind of Georg Cantor. Though his detractors supposed his obsession with infinity drove him crazy, others supposed the rejection he dealt with during his career started to weigh too heavily on him. Or perhaps he was in a poor mental state for a different reason altogether. Who knows? One thing's for sure, Cantor's legacy proved all his doubters wrong. He left his mark on the history of math by pioneering a whole new field of study in set theory, a mark that will last, well, forever. In other words, Cantor was right. Infinity. Thanks for watching The Math Show with Mr. DeClerico. Be sure to click subscribe, hit the like button, and all that good stuff.